this night guest. I would like to prima in italiano velocemente perché è importante che sentano anche gli italiani, poi switcho di nuovo in inglese. Ci sarà a maggio, in particolare l'11 e il 12 maggio e il sabato successivo, si terrà qui in Copernico e anche in remoto un evento molto particolare che è sostanzialmente un webinar di 2 giorni, prima sulle applicazioni notarili e poi sulle applicazioni tipo Oracolo su Bitcoin, seguito da un hackathon. Now I switch to English, but it was important that also the many Bitcoin developers that cannot be Bitcoin developers because they cannot read in English could listen to this. So there will be an hackathon with 2 days of workshop. You all know that there is a lot of buzz around blockchain application. Right now we have like one Bitcoin application that actually works, which is sending Bitcoin to people. But fortunately now there are at least other 2 blockchain applications that works. The first is using blockchain of Bitcoin, of course, as a notary service, and the second one is using complex contract in order to sign or not to sign a Bitcoin transaction. So escrows, automatic escrow, Oracle services that moves Bitcoin or not. Since these 2 are in our opinion, the most important application, realistic nowadays application of blockchain technology, Riccardo Casatta of Eternity Wall and Thomas Bertani of Oraclize prepare this hackathon in order to explore and to experiment on these 2 kinds of application. So during the night of May 11th, there will be from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. a workshop about notarization, open timestamps, trustless timestamping, Merkelization, and so on. The teacher will be Riccardo Casatta, and the day after there will be a workshop where the teacher will be Thomas Bertani about co-signing oracles. So smart oracles, probably honest, secure hardware-based oracles, signing a Bitcoin transaction with opcode separate in order to trigger different conditions. This is what it's gonna be about. And on the Saturday, which will be probably I don't know. Well, the next Saturday after this webinar, there will be here an hackathon. So the webinar will be accessible also remotely, also from home, but the hackathon will be physical, will be here, and there will be a prize. The instruction to participate, you can find them on these web pages. We cannot see the address, the URL now, but basically if you search for Bitcoin building layer 2 application that matter, Eternity Wall, Oracleize, hackathon, I mean, I think it's trivial to look for the web page on Eventbrite, and to subscribe. If you subscribe, you will get the instruction to participate. Of course, there is one condition: to pay a very small amount, but in Bitcoin. Who is not able to use the first use case of Bitcoin, which is sending Bitcoin, will be automatically excluded by more complex use cases. And there will also be like a treasure hunt, a technical challenge, and the address to send Bitcoin will be the result of the technical challenge. So the public will be selected, and there will be a prize in money, in Bitcoin actually. I don't remember the amount, but I think it's interesting enough, and you can find it on web. So please, take a picture of the screen, go and Google Bitcoin building layer 2 application that matter by Eternity Wall and Oracleize, and if
yet. Also, there is a surprise. There is one of the most important core dev among us, Luke Dashier, but I won't say you where he is right now, because he is among us as a Bitcoin fanboy. So maybe you will have the chance to meet him, maybe not, but he will attend. So Now it's time for Christopher.
Thank you, Mur. Thank you, everybody at Blockchain Lab for having me out here as your guest. Again, my name's Christopher Allen, and I'm best known for TLS, but before TLS I was involved in some very early cryptocurrency work. I worked with David Chom on DigiCash, worked with the founders of PGP, even things like the first Red Hat commerce server, etc. So I've been doing this for a very long time. I was CTO of Certicom in the late 90s, early 2000s, and more recently I was VP of Developer Relations for the secure Android phone called Blackphone. Currently I am involved with the ID 2020 effort, which was a UN conference on digital identity. As was mentioned before, I'm host of Rebooting Web of Trust, and of course I am principal architect at Blockstream. So Blockstream, who are we? Well, fundamentally we are a number of developers mostly who have come together who believe in trustless and permissionless systems. To date, we have a product called Liquid, which is now being deployed to Bitcoin exchanges around the world to basically enable some capital efficiency and liquidity between the exchanges and their major customers. It's in alpha testing now. We have an open source Elements sidechain product. We're in the second major release of a beta that supports now confidential transactions and confidential assets. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, we also acquired Green Address, Lawrence's company that was based out of Milan. So fabulous. Another thing we fundamentally believe in is in fairness and accountability. We do believe that markets need to work together. They need to be able to, we don't want to see one market. There are going to be many markets. And likely there are going to be many blockchains. We do have some pretty firm opinions about what the nature of those blockchains will be, but we believe there will be more than one. So in order to do this, we need trustable and secure, and I use the word fiduciary, transactions across multiple blockchains. So if you are using Bitcoin, and you need to be able to do kinds of functions that Bitcoin isn't able to do, you need to be able to move your coins to another blockchain to be able to do that. Do derivatives, do other kinds of transactions that Bitcoin isn't designed to do. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that first statement. We believe in trustless and permissionless systems. So trustless does not mean no trust. Instead, it's that trust in people is not required. Trust is inherent to the design of the system. You're in effect trusting the system as a whole to do the work of trust that is required for everybody. Another aspect of permissionless, which is very important to me, is it also means censorship resistance. No one can be denied the ability to participate. And this is very, very important because it allows freedom of association and anti-coercion. We need the ability to work together, to be able to communicate, to be able to collaborate, and we don't want other people to basically stop us from being able to do good work. We also don't want people to force us to do things that we shouldn't have to, so we're very anti-coercion. And I was showing this quote earlier on the screen, that basically economic freedom is essential for political freedom. And this is something that is very important. So an aspect of trustless and permissionless means that Blockstream cares deep about fungibility. Now many of you may not be familiar with the term, but basically, a commodity or good that can pass hands from one person to another and not be tainted along the way, they can be substituted freely and clearly, is very important. Because that's what allows for the permissionless, this decentralized capability that we have. Bitcoin today doesn't completely address this problem. It was certainly better than solutions prior to the invention of Bitcoin in 2008. But it is a public ledger. There are people doing fingerprinting and metadata tracing and all different types of tricks to identify who you are and maybe limit your ability to do transactions or do business with each other. In particular, some exchanges and wallets are using traces back for hops, excuse me. Now, if you think about it, you've heard 6 degrees of separation, that term where you're associated with everybody in the world within 6 degrees of separation. Well, Facebook has like 4.35 degrees of separation between everybody in Facebook. That you, by using Facebook, are 4.5 degrees from everybody who possibly uses Facebook. That means all it takes is one bad actor to make everybody else who's on Facebook not be able to participate if 4 hops is the criteria. Thus, your actions, which may be completely legitimate, could result in the loss of funds because of somebody else's actions, and we don't believe that that's fair. So Blockstream is very actively involved in supporting efforts to increase fungibility, and this includes things like Greg's CoinJoin, Lightning networks, which I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about this year, more sophisticated structures like ring signatures, which is what we use with confidential assets and transactions, and very advanced technologies like Mimblewimble, which are very interesting but also very complex. Now, in all of this, we believe in fairness and accountability. So marketplaces need to be equitable and just. If you enter into a marketplace and do a trade, do some interaction with somebody else, you don't want somebody to be treated advantageously over your trades, right? I mean, this is has been a history of problems in marketplaces that parties take advantage of this undue influence in a marketplace. So we want to eliminate that. We want to defend you against undue risks and non-financial losses. If I have my identity stolen, it can take me 40, 50 hours of phone calls and things of that nature to recover my an identity that's been stolen. That's a non-financial loss. It's loss of time, though, and it's very significant. But we do believe in accountability. People who are in authority over your funds, over your money, or you've delegated to them the ability to do different things on your behalf, they have a fiduciary responsibility to you, and they ought to be able to be accountable for those actions. Increasingly today, we're finding that the people that we've given our money to, our taxes to, etc., aren't accountable for their actions, and this is causing problems. So we're not asking technology to coerce the powerful to be accountable. We don't want to coerce any more than we want to be coerced. But we do believe that the economic majority is attracted to those people who offer true transparency, true accountability. So we are very involved in tools for fairness and accountability, transparency, and consent. And again, from Milton Frieden, he believes that the greatest threat to freedom is the concentration of power, and I believe that that's what the Bitcoin community has as a fundamental value. This causes a balancing act because we desire to have this fairness and accountability, and to be able to prevent human rights abuses and all the different types of things that are possible abuses of accountability. But when they conflict, when fungibility, the utter ability not to know and have confidentiality about things, conflicts against accountability, which is the right to know about who's doing what, etc., we always want to be in favor of the individual over the group. So when we want this capability to have accountability for the powerful and privacy for everybody else. So there are limits, and that's kind of the point of this Albert Camus quote. We have to balance these. The two ideas must find limits within each other. So this is why I came to Bitcoin. I chose to work with it because of this trustless and permissionless nature, which leads to non-coercion. I came to it because it's censorship resistance, which allows us to have freedom of association. I really support this coercionless accountability. This means that parties cannot be forced to reveal personal or confidential information. They can choose to if they wish to. If I consent to give my CPA information about what my transactions are to help them manage my business, I should be able to do that without hurting my security. Similarly, I should be able to offer a zero-knowledge proof for some of these new technologies to basically say, I'm being fair. I'm doing the right thing by the community. I'm not cheating. I'm not taking advantage. There are threats to this balance. I talked a little bit about fungibility before. Obviously, we have some real interesting challenges in KYC AML and this duplication of this information about yourself that is at every bank and every party that you are doing business with, and if anything, seems to be more people. Every one of those is what security analysts would call an attack surface. So you're having to give it out 20 times. It's now 20 times your vulnerability that this information will be released. I'm also concerned about walled gardens. Examples of this, for instance, is Coinbase, in which you can basically do everything in Coinbase and never have anything on the blockchain. Conversely, there's a project out of Australia that concerns me called Vulcan that isn't out yet, but it could be that the way it works is you can only talk and only do transactions with other Vulcan wallets. I'm concerned about that type of practice. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about those. Now I'm going to dive into the heart of this talk, which is identity on the blockchain. So, identity on the blockchain, it's a two-edged sword. It's very useful to be able to hold people accountable for their actions, to know, for instance, that the President of the United States is doing certain types of things, maybe out of the interest of the public that elected him. I think that's important for the powerful to have that accountability. I would not vote for somebody who's not willing to give up some of their privacy in order to get my vote. I believe that's legitimate use. But I also don't want to have identity used as a weapon against the powerless. And we're seeing this potentially in India and other countries. And I have some grave concerns about that. Blockstream does not have an identity product. We're not offering you to be able to sign up and be able to get a name or register or whatever. But these same technologies that I talked about before, confidential transactions, zero-knowledge transactions, crypto blinding, non-correlation services, these technologies can be used to help protect identity. So we wish to be part of this growing dialogue about identity on the blockchain, because if we don't speak, there are going to be a lot of bad solutions emerging, and we don't want to see that happen. We have to learn together, we have to work together to make these solutions be useful and meet our mission and our goals of a trustless and permissionless world. Now, why is this important now? Well, United Nations has a target in 16.9 to have legal identity for everybody in the world, and there's basically 1.5 billion people with no legal identity at all. 230 million children under 5 years old can basically be walked across the border, oh, this is my nephew, and then be taken to a work camp or to sexual slavery. There's 60 million stateless people and refugees who the nature of the governments that they were born under are either not in existence anymore or are not serving them. I also think that there's been an emergence by a number of countries to do things and look at Aadhaar. It's registered approximately 1 billion Indian citizens, and there are some very good things that it's done. It's allowed for certain kinds of services to be used that were not available, but allows for certain kinds of cheating to be avoided, but it violates some of the best practices that we've learned in the first world. It's almost like, it feels to me like 1995 technology. In addition, India made very few laws against profiling, discrimination, abuse by law enforcement, and as the people are becoming more aware of this capability of this particular identity system, we're seeing those abuses happening. And the whole thing's built on biometrics, and you can't revoke a fingerprint. So once your fingerprint has been stolen by somebody, you're stuck because you can't revoke it. There's some historical knowledge about this type of thing here in Europe. In World War II, more Jews died in Holland as a percentage of population than died in Germany. Why was that? Well, Holland had the best civil service system in Europe at that time. Remember, this is the end of the Depression. They've got all kinds of ability to understand who is doing things within their country and help them with services, make sure that people don't starve, etc. Well, the first thing Germans did, they went into Holland and basically grabbed all of those records, took it back to them and abused that information. So it wasn't that the Holland system was bad, it was abused by somebody else who basically took it over. So we want to use these same tools that Blockstream is using to protect sellers and traders and auctioneers, making marketplaces fair and transparent. We also want to be able to use these tools to protect the helpless. Another reason why now, and again probably has to do with this experience that Europe had during World War II, is that the EU has established in 2018 something called GDPR, the European General Data Protection Regulation. So this is a big stick. They're basically saying big company, small company, whatever, can be subject to 4% of your worldwide annual revenues as penalties. And even if you have best practices, you can be penalized 2% for taking appropriate measures. So every address, every personal information that you collect from anybody now potentially is a liability, a future liability on your books that you're not accounting for. So what are some of the requirements in GDPR? Well, first off, any data that applies to an identifiable natural person is subject to these regulations. This also includes reversible pseudo-anonymous data, so you may be thinking that you're not actually taking identity information, but even things like browser fingerprints and things of that nature that could be de-anonymized are subject to this regulation. Another important part of it is consent. I talked about consent earlier as being one of the principles of coercion-less systems. Well, the European Union is saying they want a clear and affirmative consent. They want it to be specific and unambiguous. They want it to be no defaults. They don't want the thing of click and it's okay. They want you to really know what it is that you're consenting to when you give your personal information to a bank or to a vendor or whatever. That information needs to be available to you. It needs to be transparent to at least you to say what it is that people have done, and it ought to be correctable, potentially reversible. And you don't want to be locked in. If you have been using Facebook, which collects a lot of personal information, and some of that information is useful for you to move to maybe a new service, European Union wants you to be able to export that data out of your social graph, your friends, etc., to a new service. This is a huge change. It's going to have big impact over the next couple of years. The same confidentiality that we're using for blockchains and transactions can be used to help aid this change.
Sorry, Christopher, this does apply only to corporate or also to national states?
It's complex. I'm not an expert on the national state thing. They do have some exemptions that they can carve out, but I think they have to explicitly carve it out. So it depends on the nation. So I know that Britain had some very specific objections, and now that Britain may be leaving the European Union, maybe the government restrictions will be tighter. We'll see. I was talking with a French international former Supreme Court justice earlier in the year, and she was saying that a lot of these things were kind of blocked by Britain, and that they may change. Another reason why this is important has to do with the rise of the xenophobic right. In Turkey, we have Erdogan. In Poland, Kaczynski. Great Britain, we have Theresa May. The USA, we have Trump. And all these other countries, including your own, have experienced at times these xenophobic right parties taking advantage of people to get power. Once they get power, they often do things to normalize discrimination or encourage followers to abuse human rights. We're seeing this in Chechnya this week. The Chechnya, which is part of Russia, is rounding up gays and putting them into, in effect, concentration camps. And I just can't believe we're not in a giant uproar about this. This is what the fascists did in Germany that I thought we learned a lesson from. So, and then once they're in power, they're changing laws. So, I mean, I thought that, in the United States, oh, sure, I'm helping fix the rest of the world. I'm helping activists in Iran manage, their challenges with the wandering gangs and things of that nature. Well, now I'm getting people are asking me in the United States, how do I secure this Twitter account so that I can talk about what's really going on in the Forestry Service? So, in particular, Trump in the USA, you've probably heard about the executive orders to discriminate against Muslims and Muslim travel. And that's just an executive order, it's not even a law. But Erdogan in Turkey has been arresting journalists, academics, and critics, and has basically proposed a constitutional change in a referendum next week to basically make the parliament useless, and it'll be basically a presidential power. So things change. You may believe you're safe now. You may be going, this is, doesn't concern me. But I think it was Cardinal Richelieu in the sort of Three Musketeers days that said, give me the writings of a man and I can find a way to prosecute you. So this is important. We need to deal with these. So to this end, because there's this real challenge of, we want this privacy, we want all these different things, but we also want to be able to interact freely with each other. We don't want terrorism. We don't want some of the bad effects in these areas. I wrote up a paper called Self-Sovereign Identity, where I defined what is self-sovereign identity and some principles. And it's been very well received. If you're interested, the URL is bit.ly/self-sovereign. Or just look up self-sovereign. I'm usually top of Google searches. So what does this mean? Well, fundamentally, the first principle is that you are the original source of your identity. You can't deny you are who you are, right? That I, that ineffable I inside yourself is you. If Facebook or the Italian government says that's not you, well, they're wrong, right? So you are the true source of your own identity, which means that identity shouldn't be an administrative mechanism for others to control. I have a colleague that basically got banned from Facebook, and he doesn't even know why, and basically all of his friends and family and whatever cannot communicate with him with the preferred way of doing it. He did ultimately get his account back, but there were no email addresses, there's nobody to talk to, it's completely faceless. And I think it was only because he made a stink and is a public figure of some sort that he was able to get it back. That shouldn't be that way, and that's just Facebook. There are much more dangerous organizations in the world. You shouldn't charge rent or be able to revoke someone else's identity. I may be able to revoke your right to drive if I'm the driving bureau, but I shouldn't revoke your identity to be able to do other things other than driving. I mean, there's a difference there. I'm not revoking your identity, I'm revoking a privilege because you've abused it in some fashion. What this means is that everybody is the root of their own identity and central to its administration. Now, that's kind of hard. That means you have to be in control. That means you have to be responsible. We do have to address things like stewardship, and when you are very young, you need people to help you, or you're very old, you need people to help you. But largely, as an adult, you're responsible, and we have to create tools that allow you to be responsible. We know that's going to be hard, but we need to do it. And then finally, things like names and citizenship and licenses and all these things, they're not identity. They're just credentials. They should be distinct as what we call verified claims that are offered by their issues for a limited time or whatever for you. But they're not identifiers of who you are. You are not your driver's license number. You are not, in the United States, your social security number. You are who you are, the ineffable I. So I've been getting together a group of people to try to talk about this, how we can support this, how we can take the latest knowledge of how these things work. And these are kind of the 10 basic principles that we've come up with so far. This wasn't intended to be a final list. In fact, I'm hoping next week that we will try to take it a little bit further. But you have an independent existence. You're never wholly digital. You do not exist online. You have to be able to control your identity and privacy or celebrity as you choose. You need to be able to have access to your data. You need to be able to have transparency, at least to yourself, about how people are using your data. Identities need to be persistent. They need to be able to last for a while. They need to be able to have, support you for potentially your whole lifetime. That introduces some interesting challenges. It ought to be portable. The information, you ought to be able to go, hey, I don't like the way things are going in Britain right now. I want to move to another European Union country. I don't want all of my identity information be stuck behind a Britain firewall of some kind that may emerge someday. We ought to have interoperability. We ought to be able to use these in a variety of different countries in different ways. As per GDPR, but I think general human rights principles, all this should be done with consent. From a security perspective, we want to minimize claims. We want to really, I talked earlier about attack surface. We want to make it such that, you're not having to manage 1,000 different little bits of data that are floating around. You want to only manage what's really important, what's really going to allow you and serve you in the future. And then finally, the basic principle of protection. All things considered, we want to protect the rights of individuals over the rights of the powerful. That's just a basic sovereign identity principle. So there's a lot of tech problems here. This isn't an easy thing. Some of this is kind of radical by many people's opinion, but I think it deserves the attention. So I've been gathering other technologists, other identity professionals, a few regulators, and even some legacy people I had, like the CTO of a major domain provider come to our conference and offer some good input. Our goal is to create the next generation of Web of Trust. Now, how many people here have heard of the term Web of Trust? Okay, so a few people. Web of Trust as a term started being used in the early 90s by a product called PGP. And the basic idea, it stands for pretty good privacy. Basic idea was that rather than having some authority say who you are, you would be able to prove who you are, and you would be able to prove that you knew somebody and that person knew somebody in turn, and thus you have some reputation that's associated with your identity that doesn't require a CA or a driver's license bureau or whatever to do things. But it was 1990s technology, and it's had flaws that largely have not been fixed in the 27 years since then. So we're trying to address those things. We decided in 2015 to have a design workshop. It's a particular style of a conference where we together try to figure out where are the holes, where are the missing problems that need to be solved, how do we prioritize those things. We worked together very hard together in these 3-day workshops. In the end of the first one, we published 5 white papers. So we created one on creating a distributed registry, decentralized registry, this concept called smart signatures, which might be useful to address these things. Web of Trust, it's not a great term. Any marketers here, any PR people, we need to, self-sovereign identity, Web of Trust or whatever may not be the right language for this. But also use cases. Like, how is this going to be used? How is this actually going to function on a database basis? And then how do we make better decisions? So those were the first 5 white papers. We also made a plan for the community. And one of the things we said was there's basically a bunch of white, mostly Californian technologists in this room in San Francisco making decisions about the world. That doesn't sound right. So we basically went for a very aggressive attempt to try to broaden that. And one of our attendees was able to get us a conference at the United Nations. I'm like, wow, I didn't know we were going to quite go to that level that fast. So we had an event last May. We basically had like 400 people attending. We had delegates from different countries and a lot of representation by the different groups within the United Nations. And basically had some calls for action. and some requirements. You know, there are a lot of people who made presentations about refugees and refugee identity problems and things of that nature, and they basically said to us, you know, here are the things that we need now. We can't wait for 5 years for a single government to do it. We have all these cross-governmental things that are happening, and self-sovereign identity is great for that. So we immediately, the next day, brought all the technologists into a room again to do our second design workshop. All of this is on GitHub. You can look it up, and there are a lot of great papers. They are technical right now, but our goal is to make them a lot more accessible. We came up with a self-sovereign identity architecture, but we also were talking about some philosophical things like what exactly is identity? Turns out it's a lot more complex than, you know, just the word you might think it is. It has to do with relationships and correlation and things of that nature. And then specifically over here we have beginning of some technological solutions, something called a decentralized identifier. And we had some of the top identity companies in the blockchain space all get together and sort of say, hey, there's some things we can do in common, even if we're using Ethereum, or we're using Bitcoin, or we're using a permissioned public sidechain. We can do some things in common. So that was the DID. We had a third design shop last fall. Should be out any day. It wasn't out today, but the final version of this refugee engagement model I'm very, very proud of. It's a sort of a 14-step deep understanding of the sort of life cycle of somebody arriving at the shore of Greece and eventually being able to enter into full participation in society in France. More specs and different things. Another one of the papers that I really liked was on how do we be wise? How can we be wise and humane in these technologies? One of the things we said at the end of that event was we're still too much in the U.S. We're even in the United Nations. We had people come in. We really wanted to go further. We wanted to expand. So we had one of our attendees volunteer to run a design shop in Paris, which will be starting next week, which is part of why I'm out here in Europe this week. And really try to encourage a lot of different kinds of diversity. I mean, the obvious ones of gender and race and whatever, but also ethnic. We want to have non-tech people involved. We want to have people at a variety of different levels of experience and social class to help if we can get them there. Right now, it looks like it's going to be smaller than our dreams, but we made a good effort to put it together, and right now we have about 30 people, I think, who've signed up for the event next week, which means we have some room. So maybe one of you is an identity expert and wants to come out last minute to participate. We have, we're obviously this is an important area. We would love to have people contribute to help make this happen. There's some open source projects that need some support. There's some people I would have liked to have flown from South Africa or even from the United States to this event, couldn't afford to, so sponsorships allow us to do that. But we are, in general, seeking volunteers. Obviously, identity professionals or people where identity is an important part of their work. We'd love to have them. It is a little technological, but we're working on making this more accessible. If you are a wordsmith or somebody who's good at translating technical things, we need to make our resources more available, more broadly understood. We'd love to have your help there. We're doing these events twice a year. We'd like to have, I'm doing a lot of it and I don't have time, so I'd like to have some people help with event marketing and event facilitation. You saw the beautiful diagrams and other things we do there. We basically have a dedicated person just to, when you say, I read someplace about this, but I don't remember where it is, we have a gopher who basically goes and finds that for you and may print it out for you and give you the link. We have people who draw on the walls what it is that people are thinking on the fly. And then we have editors who basically take these documents and that get to a rough draft form at the end of the event and turn them into final documents that are suitable. So how can you participate? The main website is weboftrust.info. Again, I'd love to have a better web design and such, but it has the basics. But all of our technical information is available on GitHub. There's probably 300 topic papers of different quality values, typically 5 final documents that basically have gone through an internal peer review process. This isn't quite the same. If you're in academia, it's not quite the same as an academic peer review, but at least we're done by multiple people within the community to make sure that they're solid, and that's all publicly available. We do have a Slack. It's mostly active during the weeks before and after a design shop, but I hope to make that a more vibrant and live community. And of course, you can either write me at my personal address, Christopher A. at Life with Alacrity, or at my professional address, Christopher A. at Blockstream. Again, the next event is next week, the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. It's at Microsoft offices in Paris. And we are working on one for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th at IDEO in Boston in October. So if you're interested, can't make it to this first one, maybe the one after that. And I am hoping to continue to be able to have these design shops overseas and such. So if you have some particular capability to help us do that in 5th, 6th, 7th of these workshops, please let me know. So that's the end of my talk, but we are obviously, I see a lot of questions possible. Do we want to pass the microphone around, or should I just repeat the question? Or
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll manage to do. Please come. I think it's better if you come here.
Thank you. It's a very quick question. Do you know the BitNation project? Have you heard from them?
Yeah. So so BitNation is an Ethereum smart contract that allows for kind of a virtual citizenship, and they've been reaching out to a variety of governments and other bodies to see if they can integrate that more. Some of the leaders have been talking with us. This is another case where we didn't get enough sponsorships this year. They're very bootstrapped and they couldn't afford to come out to Paris. But we are talking with them, and they will definitely be at the Boston one in the fall.
But is there a relationship between the two projects? Like someone provides the technology, someone provides the political clout rather than...
Right. So is there a relationship between the two projects? It's loose right now. I think they have said that they really like the self-sovereign identity principles, and they'd like to try to drive that into policy in more places, which is part of the reason why I want to do a rewrite and an update of it. I've had some interest, like I said, from a international Supreme Court justice of France around some of these principles and seeing if they can't be embodied in some place in policy. More questions? Anybody, if you got any questions, just come on up and we'll just have a little dialogue back and forth.
Maybe it's a big question, but how to marry the right to privacy to the right to be recognized, and how to protect also the business? Do you have a special receipt for that, or you are just studying in a way?
So there are a couple of different things. There is an initiative called Consent Receipts, which, if you think about it, when you're giving information to somebody, you're giving something of value, in a sense, to them. You're certainly giving something that you have rights to. So when you give somebody money, cash or a check, don't you get a receipt for that allows you to talk about the additional things besides the transaction? To be able to prove that. So there's been some interesting movements on something called a consent receipt that allows you to be able to, maybe you don't have the right with this consent receipt to solve a problem, but if there's a whole bunch of people who all have consent receipts saying somebody promised not to do something, they didn't do it, collectively you now have a lot of economic power that you didn't have before to maybe do something about that. There was another part of your question.
It's the same. I mean, the problem is Mainly it was how to protect privacy in a way and to protect the merchant rights also in a way. So you are partially already answered.
So a couple of things here. So on the basic level, this decentralized identifier that I spoke of before is something you utterly control. You can decide what you have in it, what you wish to reveal, what you do not wish to reveal. So you can have a totally anonymous identity. You can collect and publicize attributes and things of that nature. There is a challenge because certain people might put too much information in there, and we have to encourage people to be careful about it. But there's some also interesting technologies in something called correlation. We can basically do selective disclosure. So an example of selective disclosure is in the United States, you can't drink unless you're 21. But you typically go in, you show them the driver's license, it's got your full birth date, it's got your address, and it's got some biometric information, if nothing else, a photo of your face. And they don't need that. They just need to know that somebody says you're over 21 that they trust, right? So part of selective disclosure is just being able to give only the information they need to be able for you to be able to do business with them. Another aspect of selective disclosure is if you do business with them, meanwhile you go next door and you order that wonderful liqueur that you like to have shipped home, and then you go next door to there and to get some medicine for your hangover in the morning. The parties shouldn't be able behind the scenes to be able to correlate those bits of information to basically create this composite. So there's some new technologies that prevent this correlation called selective disclosure. 2 or 3 different approaches toward it cryptographically that we're exploring. It's still unlikely to be something we'll be covering at the next workshop, but we'll be covering over the next year is how to do these. In the meantime, I'm working with the W3C, that's the World Wide Web Consortium that does all the web standards, on something called verified claims, which is a format by which you can offer somebody a credential in a standard fashion, and I'm trying to make sure, putting my cryptographic protocol person hat on, that they have the capability to be able to use that once we have solved the cryptographic side of the problem.
Could the zero knowledge proofs be helpful in a way? I mean, I could demonstrate you that I'm of a majority age, which I'm not, of course, because I'm young, but maybe police could have the proofs that I am over 18, even if he doesn't know my age, for instance. I don't know.
Well, it certainly depends on what you mean by zero knowledge. A lot of these are zero knowledge. However, I will say that technologically we sometimes independently talk about zero knowledge type things with this newer technology called zero knowledge snarks, which are a different beast. It's all about performance. It's all about these kind of security requirements. A lot of credentials are essentially naturally centralized. That you have the right to do business with me is something I only get to decide, so it has a natural centralization for it, and there are ways for me to do certain kinds of things that are much more high performance when you have this natural centralization than other things where it's actually multiple parties and you don't want one party to be responsible for it, or you want a trustless type situation. In that case, you might have to go to things like zero knowledge snarks to do, and they tend right now to be not high performance. You only want to use them on critical things. To give you an example of something that uses that, so our company Blockstream in our Elements sidechain, if I do a transaction with you with the basic feature, let's say we're both on Liquid, I can basically transfer to you funds. The blockchain can register that it's fair, no new coins were created, everything was done properly, but nobody will actually know the amount that we transferred. It's utterly hidden. and yet utterly provably fair, no cheats, etc. With the newer in Elements, which is the more advanced product, if you have multiple assets, let's say you have e-gold and I have e-oil of some kind, at both which are derivatives, there can be real financial risks to revealing that we're doing this exchange. Our customers, our competitors might know something about this and be able to price us out of a contract or whatever. So it's real valuable in a fair marketplace for me to be able to hide that information. And it's a legitimate use. So you and I can do that trade, and not only can we hide the transaction amount, we can try to hide which asset. So nobody even knows that I traded out. Maybe I don't have confidence in gold, and I really want a lot of your e-oil. I can do that without even people knowing what that is. So that's a zero knowledge snark type, and there are variants of it. It's actually, if there are any cryptographers in the crowd, it's on the edge. It uses ring signatures and such. But there are even more advanced things like homomorphic encryption, where in fact the network never actually, no individual user has the keys or does the crypto. It's actually done, in the, I can't even really call it cloud, because cloud means something else now, but it's done by the network, and very, very powerful features that any place where you can't trust the individuals at all, period. You can use some of these other technologies, but they're slow and they make big amounts of proof data, so they're not practical for a lot of things today.
I've seen another question. Okay.
Hello. When I heard you reference zero knowledge, actually I found that term in the 90s, so it's not exactly new. I knew at least an Italian person who worked with zero knowledge protocols and things like that. And I also read about that kind of applications on the net from Israeli researchers and so on. You said that this technology is new.
Okay, so.
Okay.
So I did say that there's a little bit of confusion on the zero knowledge on exactly what it means. So you are correct. In the 90s, even if you go all the way back to the Digicash stuff that I worked on, like in '92, there are zero knowledge cryptography that's associated with that. But what's been emerging in the last 6-7 years now is new forms of this that use much more sophisticated structures. A lot of the zero knowledge techniques still either the key was assembled in some fashion, or there's at least one party who knows all of that particular transaction. Some of these new techniques are very powerful. Again, these new techniques also are slower, use a lot more data, and are less proven. So that's, we presented confidential assets last week to Financial Crypto. So that's like the first cryptographic conference that we presented it at. As of this week, nobody has found any serious problems with it, but SSL 1.0 was presented at Crypto and was broken in 2 or 3 hours. So you have to get it out there and have review of these protocols and cryptographic techniques.
Thank you. I have 2 questions actually. The first one is that sovereign identity. Of course, this is in some way going to clash probably with the state-nation identification. You see that this is a threat, this is a possibility, there might be some compromise, or the clash is inevitable. And the second question is, of course, identity and privacy are top and most important rights these days. But I think also that when it comes to patents and copyrights, those are also kind of misunderstood rights, which common people usually do not care about. And I think that not caring about identity, privacy, copyrights, and patents, it's very, very problematic in a digital civilization like ours. Don't you see this as a frustrating trend? Do you see like it's worth or it's possible to reverse this kind of non-interest for these topics?
I'll speak to the second point first, which is the things outside of privacy and identity, the intellectual property and the kind of partitioning and that's happening where the world's dividing everything up into smaller and smaller pieces and giving people who don't necessarily deserve the rights for it rights. So that is a problematic area. There are some interesting technologies that are emerging in this space, but like everything else, they can be abused. In effect, if I give you, the artist of this wonderful song, certain privileges because you're the artist of that song, such that only people who pay you for it can use it because that's how you selected to share it. Well, the difference between that and what Disney uses for DRM is very little. So it's a tough problem, and it's partly a cultural problem. In one of the things that Blockstream does, we have something called the defensive patent policy. So not only do we have patents, but we also license them in a fashion such that you may use them freely. But if you violate our right to be able to do different types of things, if you try to sue us for something, we have the right to withdraw that patent from you. So it's purely a defensive patent. And we've even worked out and shared with other companies an extension of that, which is the innovator's license. So in the United States, I don't know how it is here in Italy, a bankruptcy judge has sort of superpowers over contracts. And even though I made a promise as a company, if we went bankrupt, they can override that. So what we've done is we also give the inventors licenses to it as well, and the right to license it, such that if the company ever has a problem, that the people who invented it also have the authority to hold people accountable to this defensive patent license. Ideally, this would be great as a consortium. If there were a bunch of companies that basically said we're only going to behave in this particular fashion, and we all got together and pooled our patents and our policies and made it really easily, then it becomes a lot harder for people to attack the members of that pool. So that's a way that we can sort of leverage economic majorities to do things. Back to your the beginning of the question was about nation states and nation identity and things of that nature. And yes, there will be a conflict. Some of it will be due to some of the trends that mean we need this. Things like centralization pressures, things like the xenophobic concerns, etc. But there are some things we can do. First off, there are a lot of transactions that don't necessarily need government permission or identity information that doesn't need to be done with the government at all right now. They don't really have a role with that. So we want to empower those. The next step after that is there's a lot of, and this is what worked so effectively at the United Nations, there's a lot of things that cross borders. I mean, you in Europe are experiencing kind of the tribulations of the first really major change in the nature of sovereignty of nations, and you're tussling with the consequences of that. Wherever these kinds of international crossing border things happen, there's an opportunity to do things. So we've had a lot of interest. I basically have helped 2 companies get grants for about $500,000 each from Homeland Security of the United States for a self-sovereign identity system. But the target for this are things like refugee services and what happens when a bunch of money is being and people and resources is being sent overseas to help a disaster or some other thing. They can't rely on the United States identity systems for these things, so to solve these problems. So there is at least an argument to be made. I found some real interesting dialogue with the Commonwealth nations. So that's 43 countries that used to be colonies of England. And they have some specific treaties that cross borders and such, and they're very interested to be able to support the rights that they believe all Commonwealth citizens have, whether or not you're in England or in Australia or whatever. They're interested in this. So I think there's some things where we can begin to help the sovereign nations begin to think about this technology. Europe, because of GDPR, you might see in Europe a little bit easier in this area. I'll add one final thing, which is what I want to see happen, is that sovereign nations or companies or any group ought to be able to offer verified claims that give you authority to do certain types of things, or responsibility, or acknowledge a responsibility that you are going to do certain types of things. But that shouldn't be about your identity. That should be something that is offered as a credential on your that you can reveal or not reveal if it's necessary for the purposes of having a good life.
Thank you.
Very quickly on this last topic, you described it first as a service for specific niches like refugees, where their system is partially broken, and on the other hand, globalization creates a system, so they're in the cracks. And then instead you said that there might be opportunities to work with the states, so the Commonwealth. I suppose you know of Estonia's e-identity, and in the end you said identity doesn't have to be a service of the state, it's something that comes from you. The way you use identity, the relationship where identity becomes relevant, at times has a nation state as the interested party. What Estonia is doing is somewhere in between, where they are actually providing a platform for non-citizens to participate in an identity scheme which works within the EU. So basically they are trying to leverage, being a very small country, the fact that they are in the EU to get business from people who are not citizens, so they get access to the European market. Do you think states of that kind of positioning, so smaller and more willing to try new things, might actually buy the whole scenario that you described and use your technology instead of their own identity infrastructure?
So right now the Estonian system is kind of an identity system rather than a certification verified claim type system. But a couple of their board of advisors are active members of Rebooting Web of Trust, so we're talking with them to separate it. So part of what's going on there is they're basically saying, well, we can't give you citizenship of Estonia, but if you're willing to reveal to us certain kinds of information, we're willing to grant you certain privileges for a limited period of time in our country to do certain kinds of business. You can open up a bank account, you can start a company, etc. So it's kind of an unbundling of all of these different things that you get as a citizen, and they basically said, well, these unbundling things don't require citizenship to do. So I think it's a good trend. I was at ScotChain in Scotland in November, and Scotland is very seriously considering, can they, independent of England and Great Britain as a whole, can they offer a sort of Estonian e-residency for doing business in Scotland? And they see that as maybe allowing some people to come, and this was before their exit of an exit considerations. The other thing I'll say, and this is just sort of a broad historical trend, and maybe this is too philosophical, but I think every few hundred years we have a major revolution in what is the nature of sovereignty as a whole. Sovereignty we initially gave to our clan leaders. Our clan leaders then gave their sovereignty to other different forms, and we ultimately ended up with sort of the feudal ages or caliphates or whatever. Then we just had a major transformation of what it meant, and so now it became more city-states, and we're now in the Renaissance, and we have corporations and towns and other different types of things have different sovereignty rights that were very different, and then that went through a major transformation. So these happen periodically, and I think we're in the midst of this right now. I think it makes no sense that California, the state that I live in, it's really effectively 2 states. Maybe you could argue it's 3 states. There's a lot of other states that ought to be merged together, as because they're not economically self-sufficient and they're so interdependent that decisions in one state can actually negatively affect decisions in the other state. You want, in certain kinds of decisions, you want the appropriate level of what they call subsidiarity. So there are states where are killing the neighborhood state because they're allowing certain kinds of businesses at the border that are causing real consequences. So we want the appropriate levels of subsidiarity. I live in a small city. You would probably call it a town. There are basically 3. We ought to be working together. And the systems don't allow us to work and cooperate together, so we can't effectively compete with, say, Walnut Creek, which is nearby. So I think we're in an age where we're renegotiating all of what is the nature of sovereignty, and I think it's important for individuals to have much more of a conversation and have a peer relationship here, that you as an individual also have some forms of sovereignty. It's not total control. If you remember the slides that I had before, it's there's just a bunch of different things where we have to be able to negotiate fairly and competently for the best interest of both of us to collaborate to change the world for a better place, and that's what we want. And the individual has the power now to have an independence that isn't complete. That doesn't mean I can go off and drive 200 miles per hour in downtown San Francisco. That's not what self-sovereignty means. There's the slide with the guy with the nose. My self-sovereignty ends where your nose begins. But it does allow me to have a little bit more authority and power to negotiate a better deal for me. And that's important.
Well, I have 2 questions. One is more are a little bit off topic on the last part of the conversation, more into relationship between identity and Bitcoin. The first one is more technical, the second more strategical. The first one is what is your opinion about identity on the blockchain, literally project like one name and so on. The second one is right now, Satoshi Nakamoto was an example of sovereign identity. He was able to create something permissionless partially because it was pseudonymous. Right now, the Bitcoin development is almost completely done by individuals with known real-life names. Do you think that the natural predators of security systems like governments or other criminal organizations could exploit this kind of public real-life identity style, and that maybe, or do you think that is natural evolution that we get lost of all these, almost lost of the pseudonymity feature?
Well, obviously, I think a lot of people in my field are concerned that since we are providing these fungible technologies, some of these other technologies, that since they can't get their thumbs on the individuals, that they'll start going after the cryptographers and the other people. So I don't know if I'm actually in fear of it, but I consider it a legitimate risk. So I do things like turn off my laptop when I go through any airport. I'm fully backed up, so I'm willing to relinquish anything if somebody requests it. And I even have some code words with another major developer where if he's being rubber hosed in some fashion, that he can very secretly let me know that he's being coerced to do something against the security of the system that he's involved in. Don't know how real that is. Part of the business of being in security is being just a little paranoid. I don't know how legitimate that is. I hope that it doesn't have to go that far. There is some real power in some of the pseudonymity. I think Satoshi is a fabulous example, but what's the guy who the Voldemort nickname for Mimblewimble? So that was basically presented as an alternative to scaling. And in many ways, so it's just a single drop of a single file about a very new way of doing things. And like Satoshi, it's brilliant, pretty far-reaching, and I think it's in some ways more powerful because it wasn't. I mean, who knows? That person could be a big blocker, and if had proposed it, would have never even had a look at it. But instead, there was some value in it. Now he's begun to establish a reputation for himself. He's got a PGP key. He can in the future make other kinds of comments and do things and increase his reputation as anybody else can. We have members of the Bitcoin community that are very, very careful about their identity information. And then, I'm kind of a public record. I mean, I have blogs going back, 14, 15 years, Twitter back to the beginning. I'm kind of a public record. I'm sure somebody can find something wrong in there. But that's my choice. And I want everybody else to be able to have the choice to do that or do the opposite. So.
I would say last question.
Yes. Of course, you can apply this kind of concept of identity also to what we normally call Internet of Things. So, which scenario?
Why not? You're saying you can't?
No, it's but you can. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
So which your thought, which your idea about this?
So well, this is sort of related to a question I forgot to answer from his. So I am not a big fan of putting any kind of personal information on a blockchain. And I'm talking about personal data. Now, blockchain can absolutely serve some amazing things. I can create a trust anchor that's military class. I can do proof of existence and make other kinds of proof statements and things of that nature that incredibly empower my ability to create a reputation and evaluate other people's reputations and things of that nature. But we don't need to do it by putting all of this information on an immutable database. It's just a bad idea, especially biometric information. So now we get down to the IoT question. There's some very interesting challenges in IoT because they have you are kind of granting this thermometer in your backyard the right to reveal certain information about its GPS coordinates and the temperature of the day and other weather information that you're collecting, and that's in effect a subclass of my personal rights. So how do I grant that to it? How do I do it responsibly? How do I be careful? Those kinds of things for an IoT device are not dissimilar to what I have to do with my own personal information and how the care. The challenge is that IoT devices aren't very powerful computationally. So a lot of the different types of tricks that I might be able to do on a desktop, such as confidential transactions or assets, are just fundamentally not going to be possible in any near future on a lot of the IoT devices. So what we want to do is we want to grant rights for very limited periods of time. The fact that there are routers that are 6-7 years old that are now being corrupted. What I should have, a better design for that class of things is that you grant the right, and it has to be periodically renewed, that device functions, and maybe needs periodic signed updates by people that you trust, that you chose to do things. So I think that begins to answer a little bit of your IoT question. But in effect, these are, my wallet is a extension of myself, that's you have certain freedom of searching and whatever in the United States Constitution and in other governments. We don't quite know how to deal with that when we start delegating things that aren't in our physical control. We're already having problems with phones. I have my phone the fingerprint thing doesn't function on it the way it normally does. So that's things we have to be careful about.
Okay, so thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you. Very interesting. Of course, Christopher will stay around for a little bit, maybe let him drink and eat in peace, but after you can ask other questions. Before closing the meetup and let you all go, we asked if there is someone that is willing to give an announcement or something, but we also have another international guest. He was among us already in December. He is the organizer of a much older Bitcoin meetup tradition, which is the Tokyo Bitcoin meetup tradition. He is Ken Shishido, an investor in most of the most interesting Bitcoin project right now, and he comes from Tokyo and is here with us also tonight.
Grazie per la vostra introduzione. Mi chiamo Ken Shishido, vengo da Tokyo. I am doing public relations for BitSquare, the decentralized exchange, and liquidity for Bitcoin to Euro is now enough. So if you are interested in trying out, you can download that. There's no registration sign up needed. You can buy and sell Bitcoins. And this is completely open source, permissionless. Anybody can use it without security. And we are working on translations, and we would like to have it translated in Italian. So if anybody interested in helping us, please take a look. We're not asking you to do this for free. We are working on DAO organization, and we will be distributing the tokens in about a few months. So we will give you at the Genesis token generation for the work you done. So if you are interested, and please give it a try. And regarding Japanese markets, some of you may aware that Bitcoin finally has a legal status in Japan from April 1st. This status is...
It's not an April Fool, so...
It's not. Yeah. This legal status is a bit tricky. It's like currency-like property without VAT. So the reason why it's so tedious is that current international law states that as soon as any United Nations member country, which is 197 countries in the world now, recognize currency legally, then automatically every other nation recognize as a legal tender. Because of that, Zimbabwe dollar is legal tender, right? So become a currency. So Japanese government could not afford to recognize Bitcoin as a currency. So it's a currency-like property without VAT. So that's why it's so complicated. Anyway, the downside is minimum market capital requirement for exchanges and AML and KYC, so that mom and dad cannot start Bitcoin exchange anymore.
Centralized.
Yeah, centralizing anymore. But the positive side is that everybody start talking about it. So some big merchants started accepting Bitcoin. Some of you may have seen on the news. So it was on the mainstream news and in the top, the first page on the mainstream newspaper. So it's good for Bitcoin. Anyway, if you plan to come to Japan, or I know some people in the community you're looking for partnership in Japan or anything else, please let me know. I could be able to help you. Grazie.
So, thank you everybody, buonanotte, ciao.
Thank you. Can you send me the URL when it's finalized?
Thank you.
Carissimo.